Dr. Vishal Bansal, welcome to Life After Impact. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. I am too.
So you are the chief trauma surgeon at Scripps Medical, and so you are working with people with severe brain injuries. And in your quest to try to figure out how to give people the best outcomes, it sounds like that's taken you on quite a journey to now founding a biopharma company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I kind of an interesting story. My journey started. I'm a trained general surgeon and trauma surgeon. I did my fellowship at University of California, San Diego, and joined the faculty at UCSD as a trauma surgeon back in about 2006. I was fortunate. I have my own basic science lab. We were doing studies on brain injury and how that affected the gut. And specifically, we were taking animal models, mice models, and after the brain injury of the mice models, we were looking at the intestines and looking at the intestinal permeability. Really started that concept of the gut-brain barrier that people are, really beginning to discuss now at several layers. But I was very interested in what happens after injury. And we notice in the clinical world, as a trauma surgeon, I have a lot of patients. The majority of my patients actually have traumatic brain injury, both mild, which are really what we call concussions to some extent, the moderate and severe. So that's a very core part of my practice, my clinical practice. And for the mild brain injury, we really have no treatment. We just basically tell patients you have to rest, you'll get better, take Motrin as needed, Tylenol is needed. And many of our patients, they have symptoms that last for months, sometimes even years. And I know you've seen that in your practice and in your background. It's just a very common occurrence of what we see in our world. So tying it into the laboratory, as we were doing work in the laboratory models, we were noticing over and over again, kind of the link between the brain and the gut really traveled through the vagus nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve in the nervous system, and kind of ties in the brain and the intestine in a manner that's significant, because not only do you have nerve roots and nerve impulses, you also have hormones that are produced in the intestines, and that can have profound impact on the brain. And I remember, geez, this was like 2012, maybe even earlier. I remember looking at this and I was trying to figure out what in the world could this connection be. And I was doing a deep literature dive. I was sitting at my computers in a corner office. I was looked out to another medical center, part of UCSD. And I remember this one paper where it showed that when you have an injured brain, or just brain cells in general, forget an injured brain, and you stimulated with a hormone called Ghrelin, those neurons regenerated. And that was my aha moment. I thought to
Uh-huh.
myself, okay, that is really interesting, because Ghrelin, if you stimulate the vagus nerve, that helps with the gut after brain injury. And I've published that, I've shown that. If you stimulate the vagus nerve, that also increases your level of ghrelin in your body. Ghrelin is a hormone mostly produced in your stomach and in your small intestine. This hormone, for years, though that's starting to change, has been considered the hunger hormone. It's a small peptide. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, very similar to GLP-1s in that respect. And the effect, just like GLP-1s are now used and repurposed, we thought, well, what if we took a different approach to ghrelin, not as a hunger hormone, but what if ghrelin actually promoted brain health and was an intricate part of brain health? And furthermore, what if after injury, if we used ghrelin as a hormone, a therapeutic hormone after injury, could this in fact improve outcomes following injury and prevent the sequelae we see of brain injury after trauma?
This is so exciting to take something that is already a physiological loop and just say, can we upregulate this loop to have beneficial consequences? And so I love that you're taking something that the body's already producing and essentially testing a synthetic analog to say, can we upregulate this particular pathway to try to support the brain, support the regeneration of neurons, support the neuroplasticity, and help with inflammation? It's very exciting.
It is, and I like what you said when you said you're taking what already exists in the body. If you look at some of the most potent medicines we have um, on planet Earth, and as a trauma surgeon, I have to do a lot with sepsis, secondary to injury, secondary to general surgery emergencies, and we oftentimes have to use what we call vasopressor agents, epinephrine, norepinephrine. That's produced in our body. We're just simply taking those hormones, repurposing them, and putting it into a much higher concentration, giving the same effects that our body already produces. Our body produces insulin. Our body produces glucagon. Our body produces certain types of steroids, and certainly our body produces other hormones like ghrelin. And I think that by taking what already exists, finding the different effects that that hormone can have in the body, and then amplifying that effect for a specific pathology like brain injury, I really think that's the winning ticket. And moreover, the side effect profile is minimal. And that's really important when you're talking about pharmacologic agents. You know, I, as a surgeon, and I shouldn't say this because I'm a surgeon and a drug developer, but I'm not a big fan of medicines in general because of the side effects that medicines have. I think that the best medicines are those medicines that are used for a short-term period of time, restore your body to homeostasis, and then continue on with their life after changing whatever's now that can't happen for everyone, but I think in general that's the kind of theme of my own philosophy of medicine and how that can help human health. And this is a perfect
Yeah.
example. So we took this hormone, we started injecting it into animals after brain injury, and the effects were remarkable. There's these videos, we have them. It was kind of one of those aha videos that when people see it, they all of a sudden um, uh, be- become startled because of the effects. But after an injury, a mouse would have a hard time crossing a balance beam because of the injury to the brain. When we injected the drug after the injury, a week after sustaining that injury, the mice just shoot across the balance beam. I presented this data at the American Surgical Association. It's one of our big surgical meetings, probably one of the most prestigious organizations in the country for general surgery and American surgery. And I was lucky to have been funded by that organization for some of this work, not all of it, but some of it. And I presented this data in front of a room full of, the biggest academic names in surgery and the chairs of surgery across the country. And I remember LD Britt, a very prominent surgeon out of Norfolk, Virginia, was the president of the organization, and he was next to me, and I had a very specific time. And I remember when I showed that animal on the screen, LD Britt goes, "Wow." And that's not a thing that LD Britt's known to say. So that was really, at that point, I knew we had something. And we took that. And here's another funny story. So my co-founder, one of my co-founders, Kartik Shah, he was in business school with my sister-in-law, and he and his wife moved to San Diego. And he was a very experienced biopharma executive and in the biopharma space. And when we were just kind of discussing, I was just telling him the kind of research that I do, and I said, "Listen, I got this." And I, by the way, I had no even clue that this could go into the space of industry and maybe be developed by myself or my team. So we were speaking of this, and all of a sudden, Kartik had this idea. We should really form a company from this. Let's get a patent. Let's take this. I have some friends that will be very interested in this. He brought in one of our other co-founders, Amit Munshi, who's a very, very well-known biopharma executive with several very successful biopharma exits and leadership positions. And Amit was all in. So we had this great idea, a great team. Eventually, we were able to get patents. We brought in Michael Wyan as our CEO. And next thing you know it, we're actually injecting this drug that I remember in the corner of my office looking out the window, and we're injecting this drug in patients with a trial that we collaborated with University of Kansas. And now we've got a company that's up and running. We're currently fundraising for a larger trial, and we're very excited about the future.
Absolutely. So, a couple things I want to ask you. How are you figuring out what is a minimally effective dose for individual people, men versus women?
Sure. Let me get you a little bit into the weeds of how we were able to achieve some of that. So it turns out that there was another company that was looking at Ghrelin several years before we started, not too far away, but a few years before we started. This was a Japanese company actually the Japanese were the first ones to actually quantify Ghrelin and so quote unquote discover it. So this company was looking at Ghrelin for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. And they were hoping that by injecting Ghrelin, again, they were thinking of the concept of hunger and eating, that by doing so, patients would uh, get muscle mass and have a decreased loss of muscle mass, which is something that you see in ALS. And even though they did see weight gain, what they didn't measure and what they couldn't quantify for the FDA was grip strength. So they had a whole massive package of dosing, of safety. We basically accelerated our program by 5 years and several millions of dollars by buying their set and their package and acquiring their Ghrelin program. And so to answer your question, we had the dosing already optimized or near optimized by the Daiichi Sankyo experiments that were done in ALS. So that's how we were able to figure this out. And again, you mentioned dosing and why the FDA is so interested in dosing. The major reason the FDA is interested in dosing is because side effects. They are trying to limit side effects, and therefore the thought is if you can have the minimal amount of medicine that can give you the effect you need for your drug, hopefully that'll decrease the number of side effects accordingly. It makes sense. Again, one of the nice things about Ghrelin is that the side effect profile is minimal. Some patients feel flushed. They can feel very hungry. Sometimes they'll have abdominal cramping because the intestines start peristalsing. But really, outside of that, the side effect profile is minimal. So we haven't had much concern in terms of the dosing regimen as of yet.
In your clinical trials with people, I know you've looked at different symptom profiles, but in future larger trials, are you going to be including objective biomarkers like computerized balance?
It's an excellent question. As you well know, having experience in the space, it's complicated. Brain injury is complicated. The symptoms are complicated. It's akin to neuropsychiatric disease like depression, like anxiety. Those are complicated diseases. Not everyone who feels depressed feels the same way. Not everyone is anxious who is anxious the same way, and not everyone that is concussed the same way. So it becomes very difficult when we're talking about the different types of metrics that we measure in a clinical trial. Now, let me take what you asked in two parts. The first is biomarkers. We spent a good, I would say, 2 to 3, maybe even longer, 4 years looking at biomarkers specifically to see if Ghrelin would affect certain biomarkers that are leaked after a concussion. Tau protein is one of them. GFAP is another one. There's a series of biomarkers.
So you're looking
The
at blood biomarkers.
Correct.
Mhm.
Um, the problem is with biomarkers, and when we had our first discussion with the FDA was very specific. We don't care about biomarkers. We care about a patient's symptoms and how they're feeling. Because in the end, if a biomarker goes up, if it goes down, and a patient feels the same way, it's almost irrelevant. And so the FDA, because unlike cancers and unlike other types of like an infectious disease process, uh, the biomarkers themselves aren't necessarily a surrogate to symptoms. And so that was important for the FDA. They said, all we really want to see are symptoms and not simply pain. And so that's what's so neat about the SCAT scoring and the concussion, the different concussion scales that are out there, we have several symptoms, 23, 24 symptoms. And we measure each one of them, and it is subjective. It's a survey that patients take, just like they take for any other SCAT survey for before season for youth sports or even collegiate sports. Exactly the same type of survey outside of the cognitive stuff, and then patients then mark if they're feeling better or not according to symptoms. Now you mentioned balance. That's a great one. We actually talked about balance a great deal, and I actually think that's probably a big one that's not directly part of what we're measuring now, that very well could be something that we measure in the future, that in very specific cognitive details as well. So, and as you know, in the world of physiatry, balance, there's a battery of different tests out there for balance, and we're a little unclear what the best tests are to use for that. That's absolutely something that we're going to use in the future.
Mhm. Yeah, fantastic. And so then you also have to essentially show the FDA that this isn't just treating a symptom, because then you might end up with a nausea drug or a headache drug. You have to show them that this is actually treating the injury to the brain, and essentially show that it is reducing the entire symptomatology in all different domains, correct?
That's a very accurate statement to say. Um, they didn't give us an exact number of how many symptoms we need. We do have to show them a conglomerate of symptoms. We saw in our first initial trial, we saw a good movement in about 4 to 5 symptoms. Sleep was a big one. Memory was a big one. Irritability was a big one. So we do have very specific symptoms that are seen to be moving more with the drug than others. And I think if we present that to the FDA in a quantified manner with a good, large, randomized trial, I think that'll move the needle for us.
Mhm. And are you hoping that this drug gets approved for both the acute stage after a concussion, but also for people with persistent symptoms beyond, say, 3 months? Or are you trying to just focus on a time point?
Great question. Right now, we're focusing on, I would call, chronic symptoms within 30 days after a concussion. It doesn't have to be 3 months, but within that kind of 30-day window would be ideal. However, interestingly, I've always been on the thought process that the earlier you give the drug, the better, almost like an EpiPen. So if we think of an EpiPen for concussion, if we're thinking of sports, for instance, you're on the sideline, a patient gets injured, it clearly has a concussion. Wouldn't it be great to just break out the EpiPen and give a dose immediately? And the idea is to then prevent symptoms from developing down the road rather than treating the symptoms that actually are occurring. I think Ghrelin can work in both ways because the effects that Ghrelin has, hormones are pleiotropic, they have multiple effects. And one of the effects that Ghrelin has in the brain is in the immediate phase, it can really restore mitochondrial health, it can decrease reaction oxygen species. And in the longer term, it can really have a direct effect on the hippocampus and the axons. And I think that's why we can see a dual effect of Ghrelin for concussions, both in the immediate period and the sub-immediate period.
I think there's a lot more emphasis on mitochondrial disorders when it comes
Yes.
to brain
Yes.
injuries. And so the fact that you are finding that Ghrelin actually improves mitochondrial function could then also open the door for looking at its use in all kinds of mitochondrial disorders, from long COVID to other types of issues with Alzheimer's. So I think that it's funny how we learn about a molecule and say, oh, that's just the hunger molecule. And then you realize, oh my gosh, no, there's so much more to this.
I think that's exactly right. And I actually think that what I always thought of Ghrelin, yes, it's erixogenic in the sense that it causes hunger, but I actually think it's a potent memory molecule. That's the way I look at it. And and I always like to try to tie this in with evolution. In human existence, well, forget humans, mammals, in mammalian existence, most mammals were always hungry, always looking for food, always hungry, had higher levels of ghrelin in the body because they were always hungry. Um, and if you think about how we as humans have this innate memory associated with taste, food, and smell, it's pretty powerful. And I think that's because of the molecule ghrelin, that when you are hungry and you find a fruit as a hunter gatherer, or you find an animal was as a hunter gatherer, that then sears that process and that memory in your body And so when you experience that again, or you're having that hunger again, that'll trigger that memory. And I think one of one of the most impactful examples of that I've seen was actually in that Disney movie Ratatouille. And you might remember that the movie is based off of this rat that's cooking, and is a gifted chef. And they're trying to impress this food critic who's coming into the restaurant. And so the rat makes ratatouille. And in the scene, when the food critic eats that ratatouille, I don't know if you remember this, but all of a sudden he goes back to when he was a child, when he was coming off his bike. He's coming home. He's tired. He's soaking wet. And his mother gives him this plate of ratatouille. And that is Ghrelin. It triggered that response, that hippocampal response, which is innately sensitive with Ghrelin, innately sensitive TBI, and very, very important for memory. That's the cycle. And that's exactly what we're doing. We are leveraging the biochemical effects of Ghrelin, the biochemical effects of memory and brain health, and how that affects the brain directly. And that's what we're triggering.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful.
I think we've all had these memories associated with food, right? You eat something and it takes it back to when you were a child, or it takes it back to 20 years ago, or it takes it back to a time when you're traveling. That memory is absolutely associated with food and the longing of food, and Ghrelin has a role here. There's no doubt about it, and that's what the body does. And so, I think when you think about it in those terms, it just all fits together. And it makes complete sense that if you're taking the effect of a potent molecule that can affect memory and brain health, and you use it in a situation when the brain is not healthy and the brain is recovering, the effects are pretty dramatic.
And where are you at currently with your next phase in the clinical trials?
Sure. So we are currently we're actually crowdfunding because we're finding that to be very effective for us. There's a company that many people have probably heard of called Start Engine, and they help companies like ours raise money. So if you go to startengine.com and you put in concussion, or you put in our company, Oxia, OXEIA, then you'll be sent to a link where you can invest into our company. So we're currently crowdfunding. We have already conducted a phase 2A trial that we published in Neurotrauma Reports last year. And we are currently trying to launch an FDA endpoint study with the money that we're raising through Start Engine. And in doing so, we will then be on the next phase to then conduct a large phase 2B trial, almost a phase 3 trial, which is really at that point getting ready to present to the FDA for approval. So we're pretty close. We get over the hump of a couple of these trials, and the next thing you know, we'll be able to have approved safety and an approved drug ready for concussions, first ever in its class for the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I can absolutely put the Start Engine link in the show notes if people are interested in helping out with the crowdfunding. Is there a
Thank you.
minimum entry point for
No,
that?
no,
Okay.
I think Start Engine has a minimum, but it's not much. $300-400, I think, is what it
Hmm.
is. But there's we actually we were oversubscribed in the first round. It went by very quickly and very fast, and so we've opened the second round, and so it's been great. The public gets it. Just about everyone I speak with is a trauma surgeon, and when I get to know them more and they find out what I'm doing, they get very excited. When is this coming out? What can I do? What can I help? How can I invest? And this is exactly how you can be part of it. We're lucky to have some really powerful names in the NFL to be part of the company as well. And Alex Smith being one of them, who had a very famous concussion when he played for the San Francisco 49ers, actually caused him to be benched, and Colin Kaepernick then took his spot. Very kind of famous story. So he's been instrumentally involved in the company, and is on the board as well, and it's been a real voice for us. And we really hope that we can change the narrative here.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, doctors want to help people. And when it comes to concussions, I think a lot of them feel like their tool bag is limited. And so to be able to have a really valuable tool in your tool bag with the research behind it that says this is going to minimize people's symptom burden and help them heal faster, I think that so many doctors and physicians and clinicians would be just very excited about that.
Yeah, we agree.
Mhm. Amazing. Well, thank you for your time. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about? Something else that I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I just hope that I'm really excited and happy that you're taking interest in this and us in general. If you have any questions, or your audience has any questions, or anyone in your network has questions, please feel free to email us and email me. I'd love to talk about this. I'd love to get the word out. We really think that we're onto something here, and really hope we can affect human health.
Yes, I think so too.